Hello and welcome everyone to the Arab Organization for Human Rights in the UK. We would like to welcome and thank everyone for attending today's webinar. As Israel pushes forward a bill to impose the death penalty on Palestinian prisoners, we are witnessing a dangerous shift from decades of extrajudicial killings to formal state-sanctioned executions. This proposed law, which just passed the first reading and is backed by Netanyahu and Ben-Gvir, would codify discrimination by branding Palestinians as terrorists and using the courts to legitimize political vengeance. Today, the Arab Organization for Human Rights in the UK webinar will bring together international experts to examine the legal, political, and human rights implications of this bill, and to discuss how it fits into the broader system of violence, torture, rape, humiliation, and death in custody. We'll explore what this means for justice and accountability and the future for human rights. The topics we will cover in this webinar will include the legislative process, which is the status of the death penalty bill in the Knesset and its political drivers, judicial discrimination, how the law applies solely to Palestinians and violates equity before the law, international law implications, contradictions with the ICCPR and the Convention Against Torture, and customary international norms. From extrajudicial to judicial executions, linking field killings, torture, and prison deaths to the push for legal death penalty, and accountability and advocacy, the role of international mechanisms and human rights organizations in confronting Israel's impunity. Before I introduce our speakers, we will show testimony from a Palestinian woman from Gaza who was just released from detention. Her horrific experience highlights a combination of psychological and sexual humiliation that prisoners experience in Israel's prison system. This is a trigger warning. Please be advised that this is very difficult to listen to.
I think it was the fourth day of my detention when I heard the soldiers shouting. They came and pulled me out of the cell while I was blindfolded. I had no idea where they were taking me. They told me to take off all my clothes. They pinned down my arms and legs, laid me on a metal table, and pressed my chest and head against it. They tied my hands tightly, maybe even to the edge of the table. And then I was raped. I couldn't resist. I was tied, blindfolded, and I screamed from the pain and fear. They started hitting me on my back and head as I cried and begged them to stop. But they didn't stop. Amid my screaming, I heard the click of a camera. That's when I realized they were filming me while I was naked. They left me thrown there for a whole hour, in the same position, my hands and legs bound, completely naked. An hour later, one of them came back and repeated the same thing. I was screaming, resisting, crying. And every time I fought back, they beat me harder. I heard the soldiers laughing around me, and again I heard a camera snapping pictures. I can't describe how much pain and humiliation I felt in those moments. I wished for death every second. After they were done, they left me alone in that room. I stayed tied up with no clothes on for many hours. I could hear them laughing and speaking Hebrew outside. I felt like I was nothing. Their stares and laughter crushed me. After more than an hour, a masked soldier entered. He removed the blindfold from my eyes and slightly lifted his mask. He was white-skinned and tall. He said he was Russian. That soldier assaulted me too, and then slapped me hard across the face. I was still naked, and I couldn't do anything. I spent 3 days in that room. Hellish days. The first day, what happened twice. The second day, again, twice. On the third day, it didn't happen, but they left me naked the entire time. They kept peeking through a slot in the door, mocking me and filming me on their phones. One of the soldiers told me, word for word, "We'll post your pictures on social media so everyone can see you." You can't imagine how shattered I was when I heard that. But I couldn't respond. Only tears came. Eventually, while I was still lying there, I got my period. When they saw me like that, they untied me and threw me some clothes. I finally covered myself, and they moved me to another room. But my life after what they did was over. They killed my soul and left me completely broken.
So, I would like to take a moment and just acknowledge that this is what Palestinians are going through, and this is what we are seeing across our screens every day. Thank you to our distinguished speakers for coming to discuss this continuing human rights, these human rights crimes. And I would like to welcome our distinguished speakers. We will first introduce Melina Ansari. She is the assistant researcher in the Israel-Palestine division at Human Rights Watch. Welcome, Melina.
Thank you.
Yes, you'll have about 5 to 7 minutes for speaking. Thank you.
Thank you everyone for coming and for your time. It's a really important moment where we all gather in order to stop a potentially catastrophic law. Just for the context of background, the death penalty law against Palestinians in held for crimes has passed the first reading in the Israeli Knesset by 39 votes to 16. So a big majority of the Knesset members representing the Israeli parliament have approved and passed this law. For Human Rights Watch, the situation inside the Israeli prisons and detention facilities has extremely deteriorated since October 2023. But of course, we understand that Israel's extrajudicial killings of Palestinians has been ongoing for decades. And this form of applying a law that, imposes on courts to authorize the application of the death penalty with regards to crimes that the law identifies or describes as, when it includes killings of Israelis either intentionally or recklessly, and if that act is motivated by racism or hostilities towards the public, and committed with the objective to harm the state of Israel, and in general the Jewish people. So while the law does not explicitly note that it should be applied on Palestinians, the way it is written and the specific conditions that are and the elements that are proposed in this law make it very much understandable that the only ones who will be held under this death penalty are Palestinians. And to better understand the situation or the alarming situation that brings this law into life, although it only past the first reading and will be sent to a committee before being proposed for a second and third reading, we need to act together in order to immediately abolish and withdraw such a law from coming to life. As I mentioned, with the situation in the occupied Palestinian territory, whether in East Jerusalem, the West Bank, or Gaza, we are seeing Palestinian lives being taken for granted and never having the attention on it. It's really mind-blowing that Israeli authorities would even go a step further into codifying a death penalty when for over a decade there has been increasing reports of extrajudicial killings across the West Bank. Just in 2022, Human Rights Watch published a report on these extrajudicial killings that also include children and individuals who the immediate policy of Israeli authorities is shoot to kill. There's no understanding of the application of international human rights law, where the use of force should only be used in certain circumstances when there's imminent threat to life of an individual. But in many cases, what we see is that the policy is just shoot to kill without any imminent. But what I also want to really clarify that the conditions inside detention have already escalated to the worst, where we are seeing increased number of Palestinian deaths inside custody. At least 77 Palestinians in the past 2 years have died inside Israeli custody. And according to autopsies, these individuals were either clearly, had imposed upon them medical neglect, where if they had diabetes or chronic illnesses or injuries that they acquired during abusive detention conditions, or during their arrest, or even prior to their detention, were almost always met with neglect or intentional not providing with the proper medical treatment inside detention. So we're talking about 77 Palestinians inside detention who who died inside Israeli detention, either from clear medical neglect or health violence to their health, but as well as from the abuses they've been subjected to, whether it was Physicians for Human Rights Israel or other Palestinian organizations who were part of the autopsies, reveal really the conditions inside detentions are leading to deaths that shouldn't happen. So in many times what we see is that there's complete lack of impunity, and this law being passed in the parliament and the first reading with a huge majority only shows the culture of impunity that is given to the reckless killings of Palestinians. And with the language of the law used, it in a way is part and parcel of Israel's apartheid, crimes against humanity of apartheid that it imposes on Palestinians in the occupied territory. When the law is visibly characterized in order to only hold Palestinians under this death penalty, it feeds into and plays an integral part into Israel's sustaining of oppression and domination of Palestinians inside the occupied territory. We oppose the death penalty in all contexts, and it is a form of torture and ill treatment and cruel and degrading treatment. But when Human Rights Watch itself, along with consistent reports by Israeli organizations, Palestinian organizations, even the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, have repeatedly reported on abuse inside detention, including torture, sexual violence, as we just heard, rape, deprivation of food and water, brutal prison raids inside detention, that already form a culture of impunity that is allowed in many cases by Israel's national minister, Ben Gvir. What the point I want to emphasize is, for years and years, we've known about the brutal detention conditions Palestinians have been subjected to, and the silence of the international community not pushing Israeli authorities and holding them accountable to what happens inside Israeli detention only emboldens Israeli officials to take it a step further, understanding that this impunity gives them a green light to commit or to institutionalize and use laws in order to commit more atrocities and violations against Palestinians. The law basically authorizes Israeli military courts to impose a death penalty on civilians. And this cannot be, not read within the understanding that these Israeli military courts are also part of the apartheid system that Israel imposes. The conviction rate in these military courts for Palestinians is above 99% according to Israeli human rights organizations. So there's no due process guarantees. Most Palestinians are presented before this court without the main principle of fair trial guarantees or the main principle of innocent until proven guilty. When we have 99.7% of Palestinians convicted in these military courts, we can definitely understand how this law would be weaponized against the right to life to Palestinians. And when we talk about the death penalty, there's no going back to it. There's no retroactively, providing a way to really deal with this, because a life will be taken immediately. So the concern here is honestly the lack of attention on the harms and not only harms but the brutality that such a law provides. But we also recognize that this law is being pushed by Israeli officials, by the Minister of National Security, Ben Gvir, in a context where the Israeli society is going into elections next year, and we cannot look into this law without the politicization that it is being used and weaponized under. Maybe I'll just briefly sum it up to say, when we see the death numbers of Palestinians inside Israeli detention rising, and when we see reports of extrajudicial killings rising, all in the same context and time frame where Palestinians inside the Gaza Strip have been subjected to extermination and acts of genocide, we do need to hold ourselves accountable to how much are we pushing states to really respect the law, or really understand what the role is in order to stop or uproot immediately such weaponization of the law, in order to really enforce more domination and more oppression over the Palestinians. I just would like to remind us all that when there were reports of a Palestinian detainee in Sde Timan being gang raped by 9 Israeli soldiers, there was a whole issue in the Israeli parliament whether these soldiers should be protected or whether they should be held accountable or responsible. The Israeli parliament was discussing and saying that these soldiers are our heroes. We should not be prosecuting them. So when we look at the atmosphere and culture of impunity and support that is given by the whole, Israeli authorities, but also those who should be investigating these crimes, it's a really shattering moment where we need to unify together in order to push as much as possible for this law not to even reach the second or third reading. We should not, again, dehumanize the Palestinians and allow any even talk of such a draft law to happen. So again, just to emphasize, this would be just an additional form of torture and ill treatment that Palestinians are subjected to, but also the deprivation of the most important right, the right to life. which is also in a way intertwined with Israeli military courts and the conviction rate of Palestinians, and how Israeli law is being used to weaponize and gain more state domination over the Palestinians.
Thank you so much. That is very powerful testimony and will give us much to think about. I would like to introduce next Dr. Jeff Halper. He is the head of the Israeli Committee Against House Demolitions. It's good to see you again, Jeff.
It's good to be
Again, we
with
have
you
about
again.
5 to 7 minutes. Thank
you. Well, it's very good to be with you all again. I'm not in the role of a human rights advocate. I'm certainly not a human rights lawyer. My role is more, I guess you could say, as a political analyst and a political activist, in the sense that our organization is dedicated to ending the Israeli system. In other words, in some ways, it's a little bit hard for me to relate. I mean, it's very important, our division of labor. It is very important to highlight this law and what's behind it, and try to address it and all the other abuses that Milena and others have mentioned. But in a sense, it's like tinkering with the system. We're trying to reform the system. It's built into the system. These forms of degradation, of dehumanization, of violence, of genocide, of extrajudicial killings, judicial killings. I mean, they're not things that you can really dismantle, or you can oppose one or the other and somehow make the system respectful of human rights or safe for Palestinians, or it's the entire system that has to fall. And the law that's been suggested falls into the logic of settler colonialism. It makes sense. So it isn't like some bad, evil initiative that's right-wing, extreme right-wing people like Ben Gvir are pushing through the parliament. I mean, you might have that in terms of the immediate event, what exactly happened in the committee and the vote and everything else. But in fact, it really is an expression, an inevitable expression of the whole way the settler colonial system works, of Zionism. And I think we have to place it within the context that we're in now, because, as Milena said and so on, it's happening at this moment, maybe from October 2023, maybe before, but a lot of these things are happening. The genocide in Gaza, the the holding of hostage and abusing something like 10,000 Palestinians in Israeli prisons today. The extrajudicial killings, especially in the West Bank, unleashing the settler violence, the dehumanization that we heard in this testimony. About all of these things make sense because the moment we're at right now in the settler colonial process, it's lasted 130 years now, is in the stage of pacification. In other words, the final stage is normalization. That's how settler colonialism wins. It's not a victory. It's not a decisive military event. It's normalization. You simply normalize what's existing. And this is the basis of the Abraham Accords that the Arab states, even Kazakhstan, joined the other day. This is really where we're going. And normalization is the closure. It's not negotiations. It has nothing to do with Palestinians. It's basically the acceptance of Israeli settler colonialism, Israel on 78% of Palestine, and the entire settler enterprise as an accepted fact, accepted by the international community, the Arab states, the United States, de facto, probably everybody else, pretty much. But in order to achieve normalization, and I think this is what's important, there has to be industrial quiet. There can't be normalization, especially given the opinion in the Arab streets. There can't be normalization as long as there's resistance. Because normalization means normalization, that we're Kansas. We're walking around doing our everyday lives. Everything is normal. There's no issues here. The minute, Netanyahu talks about total victory in Gaza, and everybody laughs at him. Even the army laughs and says, what? There's no such thing as total victory. What do you want? The last Hamas person that thinks about liberation to be killed? You want to go to that level? And the answer is yes. Netanyahu understands what has to happen. If there's one Hamas fighter that gets up on the ruins of Gaza with a rifle and is able to shoot an Israeli soldier, that's too much resistance. That prevents the whole process of normalization from going on. And so you've got all these different forms of extreme repression and killing today in order not only to defeat Hamas militarily, which is what the Israeli army has argued we should be out of Gaza for the last year and a half because we've already achieved our military ends. No, but what Netanyahu knows is we haven't achieved the level of quiet that's necessary for the normalization process. And so you get killings, the genocide, of course, which is built into settler colonialism. But you've got all the different other kinds of killings we're talking about, including, in the West Bank with the settler violence and so on. You have all of that. But the law about the death penalty, the way they're justifying it is it's not revenge. And it's not even punishment. It's deterrence. Now, put deterrence within the framework, within the context of pacification. And the idea that, one Hamas soldier standing up is too much resistance. Well, even Palestinians that are Palestinians that still even express some national idea about a Palestine, that's too much. That's too much resistance as well. And so the deterrence means to absolutely shut down, to create despair. And this was an idea that Zev Jabotinsky, the right-wing revisionist Zionist leader, had in 1923 when he wrote this famous essay, The Iron Wall. The only way we're going to beat the Arabs, he said, is by despair, by making them understand that there will never be an Arab Palestine anymore. And that, I think, is what's built into this law. And this then relates to this whole process of pacification, break. And one of the things she asked him was, why the dehumanization of the Jews coming into the camp? Why, all right, you bring them in on trains, you have the ovens, why not march them to the ovens or the gas chambers or whatever and kill them? Or those who want you go to work. Why the suffering on the train? Why shave their heads? Why strip them? Why all the degradation on the way to the gas chambers? And he said that had to be done not because they were trying to punish the Jews or humiliate the Jews, because if the dehumanization hadn't happened, the German soldiers or the Germans manning the camps, manning the ovens couldn't have done this to other human beings. They had to make them unhuman so that the people shaving the heads of the Holocaust victims wouldn't feel they're doing this to other human beings. And I think that's where Israel is going with these laws and with its policies towards pacification. I think we're trying to create a situation in which Palestinians are so dehumanized, they're either terrorists, and this also, of course, casts them as terrorists, and I think the rapes certainly reflect this. They become such objects that they're no longer subjects. They're no longer people we have to deal with. No longer a people. The woman of the testimony said that. I've been robbed of my whole humanity, my soul, my voice, And I think that's precisely the idea. And if you then enlarge that into the wider political picture of this normalization process and pacification and genocide, I think you begin to understand the logic. And so what I'm saying is it's important that we highlight these outrages, that we try to fight them and so on. The human rights organizations do great work. But in the end, we can't dismantle and decolonize the situation law by law and step by. You can't have a campaign for everything. And we have to begin to do some root canal work, attack the system, the settler colonial system that creates the logic by which these laws come about. Otherwise, we're gonna end up just, fighting, an ever-ending battle, and Israel is going to progress. I
Thank you
hope
so
it
much,
wasn't
Jeff.
too general, and but
Yes, no, it's
that's
always
my
good to hear from
contribution.
you. Next, we'll hear from Professor Stephen Zunes, Professor of International Security and Foreign Policy at the University of San Francisco in the United States. Welcome, Stephen. It's good to see you again also. Oh, I'm sorry. Can you please take yourself off mute?
Thank you, and kia ora from New Zealand, where I am currently. I I want to just start by underscoring that none of this horror would be possible were it not for the United States. That the United States, through the abuse of its veto power, through its providing the um, military, financial, and diplomatic support, enables Israel to engage in these kinds of horrors. Obviously, Britain and other European countries could do more as well, but I think that we all know and have seen, particularly in the past 2 years, with the genocide in Gaza, the singular role of the United States. Now, this is not new. When you think back to the 60s, 70s, 80s, the national security states in Latin America, the U.S. Helped set up and even train the torturers. Same with the Shah in Iran. I mean, the U.S. actually literally brought in former German SS officers to train the Savak, the Shah's dread secret police, in so-called interrogation techniques. And today, of course, the U.S. supports regimes like Egypt with over 60,000 political prisoners, the Saudis, and Morocco. I mean, uh, uh, Freedom House recently came a report about a year and a half ago that ranked Moroccan-occupied Western Sahara second only to Assad's Syria in terms of the lack of political freedom. Um, that's the other Western Sahara is the other occupation that we need to be concerned about as well, but that doesn't get enough attention. But the thing about makes what Israel's different is Israel's supposed to be a democracy. I mean, this is the rationalization you keep on hearing. It's the sole democracy in the Middle East, and it's what has led a lot of liberals who have opposed U.S. support for repression in Latin America or or other or Arab countries or whatever to say the U.S. shouldn't be supporting this kind of thing, to nevertheless, support Israel. So it's critical that we get word. The kind of testimony we heard at the outset, we need to get this out and circulate it as far as possible, because the more because the, I mean, what's striking, I what I've that what I found, what's interesting is that even 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 Zionists who, the kind who say, "Oh, I don't like Netanyahu, but," and then rationalize for the genocide in Gaza, or rationalize why there can't be a Palestinian state yet, or all that kind of thing. Even a lot of them have acknowledged that the settler violence against civilians in the occupied West Bank and the acquiescence by the Israeli government is wrong. That the torture in Israeli prisons, the extrajudicial killings there are wrong. That, this in many ways is a weak underbelly, I believe, that can be taken advantage of in terms of getting a change in U.S. policy and those of other Western countries that that are enabling Israel to do these things. And it particularly comes up when it involves U.S. citizens. A number of U.S. citizens have, mostly, they're not all, of Palestinian background, have been killed by Israelis. Americans get very sensitive about that, and their families have been organizing and getting some widespread support. Um, the fact that Shireen Abu Akleh, um, not only was a prominent journalist, but also a U.S. citizen, also a Christian, gave her killing an unprecedented amount of support from uh, Americans who might not otherwise raise concerns. And so, some years ago, of course, Rachel Corrie, bulldozed by the Israeli while protecting a pharmacist home in the occupied Gaza Strip. I mean, this has been, these have all incidents have done, just like the murder of a civil rights activist during the civil rights struggle, raised awareness in the mainstream of the American populace that had not really been otherwise happened. I mean, if you're just bombing bombing residential neighborhoods in Gaza, they can rationalize it as oh, that is just war. Use the lies around human shields or whatever. But something about the killings that are clearly very clearly targeted and involve clearly unarmed people, U.S. citizens. That's really important. And what we found also is that the mainstream human rights community, Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, and the like, they're really doing excellent work. And they're around. They're raising objections about human rights abuses, in Iran, and in Burma, in Russia, in countries that the U.S. Americans or the U.S. government is willing to recognize are doing horrible things. And so, well, why people will try to say, oh, they have some kind of bias against Israel, the reality, and indeed they're frequently subjected to audits because of such criticism. That they have a good reputation that can be built upon. Um, and the the fact that there are also far too few, but Israelis who have been exposing these kinds of abuses, who have been, going to the West Bank and protecting those involved in the olive harvest and in the communities, is something that also I think really brings the reality of the situation uh, to make it very obvious to any objective observer. And finally, the fact that everybody essentially has a camera in their hand. That these kind of abuses on some level have been going on for many decades, and people often just believe the Israeli government's version of what happened. But if we have the evidence and circulate it widely, not only does it expose the atrocities themselves, but also underscores the way the Israeli government lies and that their version of events cannot be trusted. So, I've been around long enough to see how human rights campaigns, how exposure of this kind of thing has indeed changed U.S. policy, has finally gotten the United States to suspend military aid or do other shifts in policy. And I really think that this is possible now. And again, the genocide in Gaza has already created a major shift. For the first time, the majority of Americans oppose military aid to Israel. For the first time, this is a big one, more Americans are sympathetic to the Palestinians than they are to the Israelis. So Americans are more able and willing to learn about these uh, these executions, the torture, the atrocities, and more willing to do something about it.
Thank you so much, Professor Zunes. The U.S. complicity brought to mind, that even Palestinian Americans who hold American passports are not exempt from the detention. There's the young boy Mohammed Ibrahim, who has now been, I believe he was 15 when he was first taken. He's now 16 years old, held in Israeli military detention on the charge of rock throwing. He's been there for 8 months, and he's still there. So thank you for highlighting U.S. complicity in that. I would like to. We will now continue with uh, with Dr. Les Teckenberg. Hello, Lex. It's good to see you again also. You have about 5 to 7 minutes.
Thank you very much. And thank you to the Arab Organization of Human Rights in the UK for initiating this important opportunity for dialogue. I agree with Jeff Halper that we need to sort of see, or that I believe the best way of sort of looking at this legislative development is by looking at the bigger picture, and that this is yet another instrument that Israel adds to its spectrum of means to implement its settler colonial erasure of the indigenous Palestinian population, which it started even before the establishment of the state, and then got its first culmination with the Nakba, and then the '67 war, and so forth, and through a combination of displacement and elimination and killings to get rid of as much of the indigenous Palestinian population. And the introduction of this bill is yet adding another tool to that toolbox, so to speak. Israel already retains the opportunity of the death penalty in its laws since its establishment, but has only applied it partly or importantly as a result of very significant objections to the death penalty in Jewish law. Has only applied it so far in the Eichmann case, and has refrained from considering the death penalty in its at least as a judicial measure in its struggle against the Palestinians, as other speakers rightly highlighted. I mean, it has resorted to extrajudicial killings at a large rate, but has so far refrained from further expanding the opportunity to use the death penalty in its struggle against the Palestinians. And this is indeed this legislation, and also the likelihood, the way it's been presented, and the judicial avenue, or the parliamentary avenue that is used, with only the votes of those absent in the Knesset not contributing to the to the elective process or to the legislative process. Quite likely that the law will be adopted probably quite rapidly. There's the concern, or there's already talk about making the law, something that is unheard of, and also further shows how Israel is sort of in a kind of bubble, completely losing its sort of own values, as well as adherence to sort of general principles of law, principles of international law, and so forth, as there is significant debate about a retroactive application of the law, that the law can be used to commute the penalties of existing prisoners who have been convicted of, the categories of crimes for which the death penalty is considered, and can sort of retroactively be applied to those who are already convicted currently of long prison sentences. And that's, of course, something that's unheard of. Now, looking at this systemically, looking at it from the perspective of international law, I mean, the starting point is that Israel has no authority whatsoever to promulgate these laws over the occupied Palestinian territory, both the Gaza Strip and the West Bank and East Jerusalem. The International Court of Justice has made that crystal clear in 3 successive advisory opinions, the most important one, that of July of last year, but it was preceded in terms of articulating the application of sort of binding norms, peremptory norms of international law, already in its ruling of 2004 ruling on the barrier, on the wall, and then again on the ruling last month on the essentially judging the laws by the Israeli Knesset to try to put a stop to the operations of UNRWA, the UN Palestinian Refugee Agency. So Israel has absolutely no authority, as the highest court has established. It should be out of the OPT. It should abolish its system of apartheid, of discriminatory laws. It should remove the settlers. Now, of course, Israel has ignored those rulings, as it has also ignored the ruling, the provisional ruling by the ICJ on the genocide case initiated by South Africa. But it doesn't mean that the starting point also for advocacy and for engagement of third countries is that illegality, and especially as the principles from which the illegality flows are provisions erga omnes, are imperatives of international law that apply not just to Israel, but apply to all other UN member states, and in particular, obviously, to member states that have influence over Israel's conduct. And it's interesting that the most recent ruling of the ICJ happened on the same day that Francesca Albanese released her latest report as UN Special Rapporteur. The force of her reports dealing specifically with the Gaza genocide, and essentially making clear that the genocide in Gaza is, yes, first and foremost perpetrated by Israel, but it is at the same time a collective crime. And if it were not for the complicity of the US, as the previous speaker correctly mentioned, but another 60 states that have in different ways enabled the genocide to happen, and by extension, the other atrocity crimes, the continuation of a regime of apartheid in not just in Gaza and the West Bank, but also in Israel proper. The other war crimes and crimes against humanity that Israel has been very, without any doubt and with an abundance of evidence being established that Israel has made itself guilty of. All of these crimes, the countries that have provided weapons, that have provided Israel with political cover, with diplomatic cover in the Security Council, in other fora. It's not just a veto of the 5 permanent members. There is also watering down language of resolutions in other fora, the half-hearted measures that the European Union has been taken, the facilitation of trade, the facilitation of academic and cultural and sport connections and so forth. All of that, allows the system of settler colonial erasure to continue, and this new law, from my perspective, is just, as I said, another element in the Israeli toolbox. I believe that indeed, for human rights organizations, activists, investigative journalists, also diplomats, and increasingly the members of the global majority, previously referred to as sort of the global South, need to leverage that third country responsibility, which is on the one hand a responsibility for states that make themselves complicit in, they are complicit in the commission of international wrongful acts, generating state responsibility, but that increasingly, and especially where, in the case of genocide and in the case of the most serious atrocity crimes, the political acts and inaction by key leaders of the global minority, formerly the global West, are giving rise to individual criminal responsibility by voting to shield Israel of accountability, by refusing to pass legislation to stop arms deliveries, and so forth, and so forth. And for all the details, have a look at Francesca Albanese's reports, which document this in great detail. So you begin to see that Western leaders are getting nervous about it. On the one hand, they don't want to be accused of anti-Semitism, but on the other hand, it's also not good on your CV if you're sort of complicit in the commission of genocide and other atrocity claims. So at the political level, it can be leveraged. Lawyers can leverage it in national courts, because all of those provisions that have been violated by Israel are of such a magnitude that they give rise to jurisdiction of national court to pursue perpetrators. So I think that is really an avenue that should very strongly be pursued in addressing those ever more extreme developments that are happening in Israeli society. And let me leave it at that.
Thank you so much, Lex. We have our next speaker is Eric Warsaw. He is an independent social media journalist, writer, and show host. Welcome, Eric.
Thank you so much for having me. Greatly appreciate you. Ever since the semi-ceasefire, since October 10th, there's still been 240 people killed, And that's on top of the 69,000 that have already passed away, been martyred since the whole conflict started on October 7th. A semi ceasefire, because it's not if this is all going to fall apart, it's when, especially under Benjamin Netanyahu. They've had 75 years of no peace, over 75 years, and they've completely failed to peacefully assimilate into the area. And it's not just Palestine. There's been major attacks on Lebanon, Yemen, Syria, the entire region. And it's not just military attacks. They also do many acts of subversion. Syria actually had a good economy before 2011. Syria had a good economy. Libya too, under Gaddafi, good economy. They're artificially ruining economies, suppressing economies, making the entire region fearing for their lives, lowering their standards of living, all so that they can keep more and more power and be safer, because allowing another country wealth does make them have the ability to push back later on in the future. So they artificially suppress the entire region around them. And it comes to mind, it's does Israel have the right to exist in the Middle East? Maybe Israel can live somewhere else, but I mean that's a serious thing now, because I've always thought a two-state solution was practical, and anything other than a two-state solution would be idealistic and naive. And now, after all of this, I've changed my mind. I think that that only a state for Palestine and for a complete decolonizing of the entire area, that's what's necessary. Because I think it's naive and idealistic to keep a group of people in there who have been in there for over 75 years, constantly suppressing and constantly attacking all their neighbors, not just the Palestinians, that this is going to continue on. I mean, this can continue on. What is the solution here? I think we really need to reconsider Israel's right to exist in the Middle East. They can exist somewhere else. The Russian Oblast on the other side of Russia, that's a land area 50% bigger than the area they already have. So this whole conflict makes us really re-examine everything. And Israel has way too much influence on American politics, on American media, on American education system, on the American businesses and the American economy. This is getting absurd. I think we have to reevaluate everything. And on behalf of Palestinians, because I've heard many Palestinians say this too, for a two-state solution, a lot of people do not trust a two-state solution, for they fear that they might get a leader like another Mahmoud Abbas from the West Bank, where if Israel can put in puppet politicians in a superpower across the world in America, if Israel can do that to America, and there's a two-state solution, the Palestinians will be living under a puppet leader, just as suppressive. They will not have peace. They will not have rest if there's a two-state solution too. We really need to examine Israel's right to exist in the Middle East, because it steps on the toes of everybody else's right to exist and live peacefully. So that does need to be examined. And I'll just conclude by talking about Hamas. They are heroes. They are the resistance movement. They are pushing back. They're fighting for the freedom of their people. And I think Hamas will be held up on a pedestal, as the Zionists will be looked down upon for the rest of history. And thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much, Eric. Just one more note on the two-state solution. Historically, partitions have been pretty bloody affairs that do not end conflict. Oh yes, we have one more speaker who just came. I'm sorry, give me just one moment. Okay, thank you. Sorry about that. I would like to welcome Jeremy Corbyn. He is a UK MP, Member of Parliament. Welcome, Jeremy. Thank you.
Unmute yourself, please.
I beg your pardon. Yes, I'm unmuted now.
Jeremy, I'm sorry, we can't hear you.
Hello, I was just speaking. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
I beg your pardon. Sorry. I thought you could. Yeah.
You can start. We are waiting for you. You can start, yes.
Who?
You.
Oh, fine. Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry about that. I thought you could hear me. Thank you.
So what are we doing? I've only just been told to come on the program. I haven't got any note or background.
Yes, so we're discussing the death penalty. So Israel has just pushed forward the bill to impose the death penalty on Palestinian prisoners. We're talking about that bill. It was just approved in its first reading.
Okay. I was talking to a colleague about this yesterday in Parliament, and he was saying that he couldn't think of any other legislation anywhere in the world which specifically meted out the death penalty to one group of people for an alleged attack on another group of people, when only one of them would get the death penalty, and there's the law concerning Palestinians and killing Israeli citizens. And I said he was wrong. There was a precedent for that, and that was the 1871 Criminal Tribes Act, which the British passed into law in India at that time, and it's seen as the most disgusting example of racist colonial superiority anywhere, and that is exactly what's being repeated now. And so I do think the rest of the world has to recognize what is actually happening with the political direction in which Netanyahu has taken Israel, and increasingly takes it with the Greater Israel policies of occupying all of the West Bank as well as Gaza, and clearly extending further into all of the neighboring countries. And so the idea that there's going to be a rapprochement with Israel on a freezing of the lines of the ceasefire, the recent ceasefire in Gaza, I think need to think again. First of all, that ceasefire has been broken. Secondly, Israel continues a substantial degree of physical occupation in Gaza on top of the routine bombardment and attacks on the people of Gaza. And so this law goes on as one more law against the Palestinian people that essentially legalizes the genocide against the Palestinian people in general, and legalizes specific acts, including, of course, the behavior and attitude of settlers on the West Bank. And yesterday I was talking with Ofer Kassif, my good friend, who is a left member of the Knesset who is suspended at the moment because of his support for Palestinian people. And we were discussing exactly that. The only policy that Netanyahu and the government have is to intensify and strengthen the occupation. And that's why the global campaign is so important. And of course, also the global campaign to end, first of all, to end arms supplies and military sharing and security sharing. And then is the question of effective, substantial economic sanctions against Israel, which have not really happened by most of the main countries that trade with Israel, that being predominantly the EU countries and the USA. But increasingly, the USA is much more politically isolated from it than anyone else, because most of the European governments have conceded some of the arguments, mainly because of the strength of demonstrations and political opposition all over Europe at the present time. And so we've just got to keep our eyes focused on what is happening, keep our eyes focused on the legal process, but above all, keep our eyes focused on trying to get help and support to those Palestinians that have survived this bombardment in Gaza, and not just give them the food and medical support that they obviously need, but also the support in recognizing their identity, their culture, and their determination to survive as Palestinians in Palestine.
Thank you so much for the comments. So we're going to, as we finish up here today, each one of you will have about 1 minute for closing remarks and any specific calls for action that you would like to make. We will start with, if we could please start with Professor Stephen Zunes.
First of all, I want to take a strong exception to Eric's claim that Israel somehow controls the U.S. government. The U.S. does have agency here. As I've noted, the U.S. has supported other torturers, other oppressive regimes, other regimes that engaged in extrajudicial execution. We support other occupations, East Timor, Namibia, currently support the brutal occupation of Western Sahara. We supported other genocides, Guatemala in the early 80s, Bangladesh in 1971, East Timor. U.S. does have agency. It's because Israel is seen as one former Secretary of State put it, our unsinkable aircraft carrier. Our Arab allies can be overthrown in coups or revolutions. Israel's their modern technological state that can dance U.S. imperialist interest. So again, the problem is U.S. imperialism and how that has, for decades and in other manifestations, challenged the stated American values of freedom and democracy. And it's that contradiction between the two is what I believe gives us hope to mobilize the American public to end support for Israel and other repressive regimes, and to really to try to change policy, as we have been able to successfully change policy in Vietnam, in Southern Africa, in Central America, and elsewhere. And I believe we can do it in the Middle East as well.
Thank you so much, Stephen. Next, we will have Dr. Jeff Halpert. Some final words.
Well, we drifted kind of far from the the death penalty for terrorist law. But if I would just continue my thought for another few minutes, another few seconds even, we're far from campaigns of ending Israeli settler colonialism. I'm also very involved in the One Democratic State movement. I mean, I think we have to begin to offer alternatives to the normalization that's coming down the pipeline in the Abraham Accords. It's not enough to simply say no. We have to have a positive vision that we're putting forward. But the most immediate, politically, I would say, the most immediate need is to end the normalization process, is to oppose the Abraham Accords And so I'm calling, and I'm beginning to organize with my Palestinian colleagues, a campaign against normalizing Israeli apartheid. And of course, the normalization is going to be cast under the framework of a two-state solution, but it's really two-state apartheid, where Israel will expand to 85% of Palestine, and the Palestinians will be in small enclaves on the other 15% in a non-sovereign, non-viable, non-congruous so-called state, what Israel calls an entity, because Israel will not allow anything beyond autonomy. And so I think this is really the challenge before us. It's true. I mean, we do have to continue the focusing on these laws. And I mean, I'm not saying we should not speak about these things. They're very important. And there are circles, especially legal circles, human rights circles, where that has traction. But overall, I think we have to really begin to think about ending Israeli settler colonialism. We have to begin to think about where are we going next. And certainly we have to begin to organize against what I consider the greatest threat to Palestinians since the Nakba, which is the Abraham Accords that we're right on the cusp of completing, actually. So that's a kind of an intermediate step between fighting specific laws and trying to resolve, with a one-state solution. The most immediate step for us is this campaign against normalizing Israeli apartheid. So thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Next, we'll have final words from Eric Warsaw. Eric?
Thank you very much. I do stand on what I said about Israel having too much influence on America. Israel has AIPAC in America, which is a lobbyist group. We do not America does not have a lobbyist group within Israel. Through BlackRock, do they have control over a lot of big businesses? The ADL has a lot of influence in our social media and education system. It is illegal to burn the Israeli flag in America. It's considered a hate crime, but they encourage you to burn the American flag and protect it under free speech. I think not just America is a Zionist occupied government, but also there's many other countries as well. I think Jordan, Egypt, England, I think Israel has too much influence on all these countries, and I think all that influence needs to be stopped. They need to be removed from any influence, and every country needs to make their decisions for their own selves. And thank you so much for having me on here.
I would remove American influence as well, by the way.
Agreed. Everybody should make self-determination.
Yes, don't let America off the hook. Next, let's see, Jeremy Corbin will give his closing statements and specific calls to action.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry I came on very late to the call because we're just voting in Parliament on a very complicated piece of legislation. I just finished that and then rushed over to my office to speak to you. So thank you for inviting me on. The issue of Palestine and the disgusting treatment of the Palestinian people has got the world's attention in a way it's never happened before. And it's mobilized millions of people all over the world in a way it never has before. And that means we have to ensure that just because there is not really a ceasefire, but a claimed ceasefire, that the news doesn't disappear and people then become complacent and think that they don't need to be doing anything. They need to be doing a great deal. In the case of my own country, we will continue the principal demand of ending all arms supplies, military cooperation, use of Royal Air Force bases, and sharing of security information that the British are undertaking. We'll continue demanding an end to the manufacture of F-35 jets in Britain. 15% of the components are made in Britain. And we will continue defending the civil liberties and civil rights of people that have protested against arms manufacture and arms companies. And I was in the court on Monday morning supporting people who've been charged under terrorism law for displaying Palestine Action placards on the street. Utterly absurd. And all of their cases are being adjourned to sometime next year, which seems to me that it could be the government is expecting to lose its own case in the High Court, which are coming up in 2 weeks' time. And so that's one of our focuses. But the other one is education of the influence that Israel has across the whole of the region, and what I think is the Abraham Accords that do have to be challenged. And the country that is perhaps militarily the most effective in the region beyond Israel is, of course, the United Arab Emirates in their military support for the opposition in Sudan. The opposition in Sudan trying to get control of and exploit the mineral-rich areas of Sudan and Darfur. And one wonders what the connection is between them and those that are supplying the arms from Israel to the UAE. And so we have a special role here to support those people in all of the Arab countries that are opposing the Abraham Accords and opposing the normalization of relations. How can there be normalization of relations when Israel is occupying Palestine, when there are still thousands of Palestinians in Israeli prisons, when there are still Palestinians being tortured in Israeli jails, and there is still the unbelievable levels of bombardment and occupation going on in Gaza, which is killing so many people, and the way in which the settlers are increasingly attacking people in Palestinian villages in the West Bank. And speaking of Mr. Ofer Kassif, gave me a report yesterday on the violence of the Israeli settlers to people in the West Bank, and he traced, I think, about 40 incidents. There are many more than that, but he traced particularly 40 incidents over the recent period, which only resulted in 5 arrests, despite many of those incidents resulting in death of Palestinian people. That is the impunity with which the settlers operate. And they're, of course, really the advance guard for the Israeli takeover of the entirety of the West Bank. And so no complacency whatsoever. Stand up for the rights of Palestinian people and for the people of Palestine to be able to decide their future and decide what form of state or government and state and government they want to have for the future. That, to me, is the watchword of solidarity. It isn't to tell people what to do and how to do it. It's to support them when they're looking for their own self-determination. And lastly, let's hear more of Palestinian culture, literature, art, poetry, music, and so that the Palestinian people are not just treated as victims, but they're treated as what they must be, a very honored and honorable people for all that they've contributed to the world and the incredible bravery and fortitude with which they've got through 70 years of this, but particularly they've got through since 2023 in Gaza. Let's support the Palestinian people.
Those are beautiful words to end with. Thank you so much. The world has we can't do anything but admire the Palestinian people. I would also like to thank you for bringing up the West Bank, because as with the horrors happening in Gaza, it's easy to also miss what is happening in the West Bank. For those of us in the U.S., the village of Umm is currently facing ethnic cleansing, and it's so I would like to just acknowledge that as well. As we close, it's essential to remember what lies at the heart of this issue, which are the lives of the Palestinians who are facing a system that is designed to dehumanize, to terrorize, and to erase the indigenous people, the indigenous Palestinian people.
Lisa, could we, sorry to interrupt you, but the point I just want to add is that too often in all these discussions, the Palestinian refugees in Jordan, Syria, and Lebanon, and the wider diaspora get forgotten. They too have a right of return, and we should never forget that.
Oh, thank you so much. It is wonderful. There's a lot of aspects. The the plight of Palestinians has been called the litmus test of our time, and it truly is that. And I want to thank all of you again for joining us in this webinar. It has been a learning experience for me also, and I'm sure for all of those who are listening. The proposed death penalty, this proposed death penalty bill, it is important to remember it is not an isolated policy, and that it sits atop decades of occupation, torture, and deaths in custody. It represents yet another attempt to erase Palestinian resistance by criminalizing their very existence. Our responsibility now is to amplify Palestinian voices, demand international accountability, and ensure that Palestinian rights and humanity remain at the center of global attention. This struggle for justice continues undeterred, as does our solidarity. Thank you all.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. And lovely to be with you guys, old friends there on the screen.
Good to see you, Jeremy.
Jeff, your beard has got even bigger than a week ago.
Jeremy, if I could ask you just one quick clarification. You had mentioned a prior bill